Hey there, friends. Welcome back to another episode of the Bible in Life podcast. My name is John Whitaker. I am the host and creator of the Bible in Life. And as I like to always say, my heart, my goal with this podcast is to provide blue jeans theology. And by that, I mean Bible teaching theology that's in the language of everyday life, set in the context of everyday life to help us follow Jesus right in the midst of our everyday life. And that's really the goal of what it means to be a Christian. Like when we become a Christian, the goal is not merely to get our ticket to heaven so that we, when we die, can go to the good place and not the bad place. The goal of becoming a Christian is to honor Jesus, follow Jesus, further Jesus' mission and kingdom in this world, to become like Christ and to embody him and represent him well to this world. And the reason for that is because that's what we were, as human beings, created for in the first place, way back when God first made the first human beings, Adam and Eve, in Genesis chapters 1 and 2. The point was that they were going to be his viceroys, his middle managers, if you will, over this creation project called Earth. And we were going to, in partnership with him, in loyalty and fellowship with him, we were going to extend his rule and his reign over the world. And in Christ, all of that is being reclaimed and renewed. And so I want to use this podcast as a way just to help all of us think about how we can embody Jesus more fully, more effectively in this world. So that's the goal. That's the aim. So if you're a first-time listener, if you just somehow stumbled across this podcast, maybe someone recommended it, maybe it just showed up in your podcast feed, welcome. Glad you're here on this episode. If you're a longtime listener, thanks for being part of the Bible in Life family. I am grateful for each and every one of you, and I pray that this is helpful to your walk with Jesus. Last week, we began a new series, I don't really know how long, a shorter series, I think, on a topic of something that I've just been really reflecting on over the last year. I mean, it's stuff I've thought about for a while, but it feels like the last year I've been reflecting on it a little more fully, especially since I spent so much time thinking through, walking through Paul's letter to the Corinthians, his second letter to the Corinthians, that's just so autobiographical, where Paul's heart and Paul's ministry shows up. It just really got me thinking about this topic afresh, and that topic is leadership. What does it mean to be a leader who embodies Christ and Christ's way? It's quite common these days to talk about Christian leadership. And what is Christian leadership? And so that's really what we're thinking about. And we've kind of titled this series, Learning Leadership with the Apostle Paul. And on our first episode on this series last week, we focused on the fact that for Paul, leadership in the way of Christ is always other-centered. It's focused on others. It's for the benefit of others, and often at a great cost for ourselves. And it's not to promote ourselves, serve ourselves, advantage ourselves, or advance ourselves. It's ultimately about others. So that's what we looked at last week. And this week, I want to pick up with really a related subject that has to do with what's the focus? What is the focus of Paul's leadership in relation to others? And the reason I think this is an important part of learning leadership with the Apostle Paul is because the focus of all the leadership books that I have read in the last 20, 25 years, the focus of the leadership conferences I've been to, the leadership workshops I've sat through. All of it, the focus has been on organizational leadership. That's just what it's about. It's about how to come up with an effective vision for your organization, and then how to cast that vision into the organization, and how to move the organization forward, and how to grow the organization. What are the barriers to organizational growth, and how to break through those barriers? It's all been about organizational leadership. And that has created a situation in churches, parachurch organizations. It has created a situation where good Christian leaders are people who can grow big and impressive organizations. I don't think that's disputable. That's just sort of where we've been at the last 20, 25 years. Like the really great leaders, the really great Christian leaders are ones who can grow, big and impressive churches, who lead big and impressive uh, organizations, for Christ and all of that. And again, that's not necessarily bad. We'll talk more about, evaluate that here at the end of this episode. It's not necessarily bad. I don't want to give that impression that being able to grow a large church, being able to grow in a large, growing, effective Christian organization in and of itself is necessarily bad. That's not necessarily bad. But here's the thing that's really important. For the Apostle Paul, the standard for what makes somebody a really effective, good, and even great leader in the way of Christ, the standard is quite different. The way Paul thinks and the way Paul talks about leadership as a Christian is like never organization focused. It's always people focused, always. And so I want to read a few passages that illustrate this, and then I just want to kind of reflect a little bit on what this means maybe for us as people who have authority, people who have influence, people perhaps who are in, clear and deliberate leadership roles. If we're going to learn leadership from the way of Paul, what does it look like to be people-focused over against organization-focused? So let's read. Here's one passage that I think you hear Paul's heart for this, Paul's focus on this. This is Colossians chapter 1, the last two verses at the end of Colossians 1. Paul really describing the aim of his ministry, which is the aim of his leadership as an apostle. He's been entrusted with this important leadership role as an apostle for Jesus, an official representative of King Jesus. Here's the aim of that. Colossians 1, 28 and 29. We proclaim him being Jesus. We proclaim him, admonishing every person and teaching every person with all wisdom. And here's the goal. Here's the aim, so that we may present every person complete in Christ. For this purpose, Paul says, I labor, striving according to his power, which works mightily within me. This is like Paul's purpose statement for his ministry, for his leadership. And again, notice how people-focused it is. In fact, verse 28, 3 times, admonishing every person, teaching every person, so that we may present every person. It's incredibly people-focused. It's about developing people, growing people. Specifically, it says, so that we may present every person complete. This is a derivative of the word telos. It has to do with, sometimes it's translated mature, complete, whole. In other words, our aim is to form people so that they are full, whole, complete, mature in Christ. Paul says it's to that aim, to that purpose, that I labor. That word is toil, strive, like intense effort and energy. I give my best effort towards not growing a church, not growing an impressive parachurch organization, but towards helping every person be mature, whole, complete in Christ. And he strives for that according to Christ's power, which works in him. It's people-focused. Or again, 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 2, writing to the church at Corinth. And again, there's just so much backstory and autobiographical detail that we don't have time to go into with 2 Corinthians, and you can actually check that out on the listener's commentary if you want to hear the backstory, because it's really important. But there's just been difficulty with the church at Corinth. There's been a lot of conflict. There's been some people that have come from the outside, and they've stirred up like hostility towards Paul, suspicion towards Paul. So there's just been a lot of stuff. And at this point in the letter, Paul he's just said, I want you to imitate me as I imitate Christ. And then he says this. And again, I want you to hear how people-focused it is and how here's what he really wants. Here's what his aim is. He's concerned for the church as a body of people because what it means for them as persons, as people. So he says, for I am jealous for you. Like this whole situation of this tension, this conflict is really causing me concern for you, and I'm jealous for you with a godly kind of jealousy. Why? Because I betrothed you to one husband, that is to Christ, to present you as a pure virgin to Christ himself. Like this is the whole reason I came, taught, preached, was to help you, like the church corporately, but each individual of the church personally to be betrothed to Christ as a pure virgin, as clean and holy and pure. But he says, I'm afraid that just as the serpent deceived Eve by his trickery, your minds will be led astray from sincere and pure devotion to Christ. For Paul, his deepest concern for the church at Corinth is their loyalty to Jesus, their purity and using the imagery here of being a bride of Christ, their purity in that. I want you to be pure in Christ. I want you to have sincere and pure devotion to Jesus. And what I'm really worried about is that for you all. Or again, Galatians chapter 4, Paul writing to the church at Galatia. Again, people from the outside have come in, stirred up trouble for the church in Galatia. And Paul writes this. He says, my children. Notice again how person-focused this is. And it's not just one church he's writing to. He's writing to actually to a whole network of churches in Galatia. And he says, my children. Like, I feel like this fatherhood role in your life, and you're like my children. And he says, with whom I'm in labor. Notice mixing metaphors. He's like their father, but he's also like their mother, with whom I feel like I'm in labor again until Christ is formed in you. In fact, I wish I could be present with you and maybe change my tone of voice because I'm confused. I'm at a loss about you. Do you hear how just in these three texts, and it's all over in Paul's letters, it's always about the people. It's always about Christ being formed in the people. It's always about their loyalty to Jesus and their devotion to Jesus. It's all about forming people. That's the focus of Paul's ministry. And so for Paul, Christian leadership focuses on developing people to become mature and whole in Christ, not so much on growing organizations, not growing churches, not figuring out how to move the church forward, right, as an organization, but on developing the people who are part of the congregation. And frankly, that's just in Paul's theology, that's just the nature of the church. For us, church has become a religious organization, but the word simply means an assembly, a gathering of people. And for Paul, it's all about forming those people in Christ, with whom I'm in labor again until Christ is formed in you. That's the heart. That's the goal. Now, does this mean that growing organizations is bad? No. No, it doesn't necessarily mean that. But here's what it does mean. If we're going to learn what it looks like to be a leader in the way of Christ after the example of the Apostle Paul, then here's what this means. It means not that growing organizations is bad, but growing an organization is secondary and not primary. That the only reason you grow an organization that's good, healthy, and effective is a means to a greater and more glorious end. And the greater and more glorious end, the primary end of growing the organization, is to develop people, for people to be formed in after Christ. They become like Christ until Christ is formed in them. So growing an organization isn't bad, but it is secondary. learning organizational skills by reading some of these books or going to some of these conferences, learning organizational skills is helpful. It can make us more effective. Maybe it can help us make less mistakes when leading a body of people. But learning organizational leadership skills is not the ultimate end. And the size of or the impressiveness of your church or your ministry or even your business, well, that's not the measure of success or effectiveness, according to the Apostle Paul. The measure of success or effectiveness is the people. In other words, the primary metric that the Apostle Paul would use to evaluate whether a church is effective or not. The primary metric used to evaluate effective Christian leadership is people being formed into Christ's likeness. That's how Paul approaches things. So our own discipleship in that context matters, right? If you're just trying to grow a great organization, your own discipleship doesn't really matter as much. And sadly, I think that's why we have seen like pastors of nationally recognized, maybe even internationally recognized churches, pastors with large churches who, because they have large churches, now they get book deals, which only makes their ministry grow even more. And right, they're recognized, they're well known, they're interviewed for everything. They have this natural reputation. Now, again, not all of the pastors who have those things fit this mold, but we've seen plenty who have large and impressive ministries or churches, and yet we find out after the fact that the way they treated people in their sphere of influence at their church, their direct reports and the staff under them, was less than Christ-like. It wasn't marked by self-giving, self-sacrificial, Jesus-like love. It at times was even ungodly and unholy. We've heard reports of this. We have seen that. But if our primary metric is people being formed into the way of Christ-likeness, then our own discipleship matters massively. Why? Because it's only then that we can say, like the Apostle Paul does in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, imitate me as I imitate Christ. Notice that. That's what Paul says to the church at Corinth. Before he says the very thing he does about being concerned about their pure and sincere devotion to Jesus. He wants them to imitate his own devotion to Jesus, his own Christ-likeness. He's offering himself as a concrete model and a concrete pattern of, as you move towards maturity in Jesus, I'm maybe a little further down the path than you, so imitate me as I seek to imitate Jesus. Be like me. If our primary metric is the Christ-likeness of the people that are part of our congregation, then our own discipleship matters immensely. And not only that, if the primary metric is people and developing people, then we must not see people as a means of helping the organization grow. And sadly, I've been in ministry long enough and I've watched this kind of stuff happen, where a leader is so interested in moving the organization forward, taking this vision for the sake of Jesus, and it's all cloaked in spiritual sounding language. But what happens is people often become cogs in the machine. They are means of helping grow the organization. We couldn't do this without you. And it's like, well, there's nothing to do without you. You are the mission. The people of the organization are the mission. They're the why? Because the primary metric is Christ being formed in them. But unfortunately, that doesn't always happen in Christian leadership, because we've spent the last 25, 30 years focused on learning organizational leadership skills, and it's all about moving the organization forward, and that's become primary rather than secondary. But in Paul's approach to Christian leadership, the organization and whatever organizational means we use, this is really important. The organization is a means of caring for the people and helping the people become like Jesus. If that gets lost, the Apostle Paul would say we're failing as a Christian leader. In fact, getting this straight is actually reflected in Paul's discussion of elders in 1 Timothy 3 and Titus chapter 1. You look over how does Paul describe leaders? What kind of people should we be looking for as leaders in the churches that Paul has started? What kind of people should be put in positions of leadership in the churches? Well, when you read 1 Timothy 3 and Titus chapter 1, the overwhelming focus is on character, not skills. Overwhelmingly. It's almost all characters. It's about their devotion to Jesus. It's about embodying Christ-like character. It's about being a concrete pattern of discipleship to Jesus. There's virtually nothing about skills. The closest thing you get to skills is able to teach. So do you understand and can you pass on the wisdom of Jesus found in the scriptures? Able to teach. And able to lead his own household well, because in the ancient world, your household was more than just your immediate family. You had servants, you had employees, you had clients, and all sorts of things. And so that implies a certain level of people management skills. That is the closest you get to skills in the list of qualifications for elders in 1 Timothy 3 and Titus chapter 1. But the overwhelming focus is on your character. Why? Because leaders are supposed to be concrete examples of Christ-likeness. And the reason for that is because that's the whole goal of being a church. The whole goal of being a church is to draw people to Jesus and help them be formed in Jesus. That's what it's all about. And so as we learn Christian leadership with the Apostle Paul, what we have to realize is Christian leadership, after the way of Jesus, focuses on developing people, growing great people, growing great humans, not growing great organizations. The organization is secondary, and it only exists for the sake of helping people be formed in Jesus. If it doesn't do that, if it's focused on anything else, if the energy gets spent elsewhere, then we need to go back to the drawing board and listen to the Apostle Paul so that we can say with Paul that we labor and strive for you to be complete in Christ, that we yearn and pray for Christ to be formed in you. That's what Christian leadership ultimately focuses on and is all about. All right, thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Bible in Life podcast, and thanks for being part of the Bible in Life family. The Bible in Life podcast is made possible by the generosity of dozens and dozens of people who support this whole ministry, including the Bible in Life podcast, the listener's commentary, and other online resources. And so thanks a ton for your support. And if you want to join the team of supporters, you can go to johnwhitaker.net, click the Give button. It'll redirect you to a page, my page, at World Family Mission, a registered nonprofit that provides financial support and accountability to this ministry and other ministries like it. So thanks a ton for your support.